views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to BronxTalk. The pandemic hit 2 years ago. We know that we have been through a lot. Jobs were lost. Healthcare has been a major consideration. We had so many people die in the Bronx as a result of this horrible pandemic. It's just so many careers have changed, evictions. We've had to deal with moratoriums. Maybe among the most difficult things is the fact that we don't always know. Mask mandates, what do you do with your kids in school? Are they getting enough support? Should they stay at home? The questions abound. As a result, through the pandemic, there have been significant mental health issues. And so we thought we'd check in with three experts who have been on our program before, but let's reconvene and see where are we at from a mental health perspective in the borough of the Bronx. So let us say good evening to the Executive Director of Mosaic Mental Health, our friend Dr. Donna Friedman. Nice to have you back with us.
Wonderful to be here. Thank you for having me.
The Chief Program Officer from Astor Services for Children and Families, again back with us, Dr. Todd Karlin. Nice to have you, sir.
Thanks for having me.
And she's known as the conflict closer. She's a conflict resolution specialist, and she's also been on the program before. We've had everybody on the show before during the pandemic. Now, as we try to emerge, we bring you all back. It's Lynne Maureen Hurdle. Nice to have you with us, Lynne.
Always a pleasure.
Let's start with you, Dr. Friedman. I pulled some numbers right off the Mosaic website. I mean, they're scary, really. One out of 7 children, 2 to 8, has a mental, behavioral, or developmental disorder. 20% of New Yorkers have mental health issues each year. That's 1 in 5. That's a significant number. Over 1 in 5 New York City public high school students reported feeling sad or hopeless. I'm guessing that's a much higher number than the statistics might show. 20% of people age 55 or older experience some type of mental health concern, all exacerbated, because we're all exasperated by the issues that I brought up. How are we doing? What is your barometer read of the general populace when they come in for services at Mosaic Mental Health?
Yes, well, thank you so much. And all of those things have gotten more challenging. The truth of it is that we have not begun to address these issues fully. And it's going to be many, many years before we get to a place where people feel like they are back to where they were before the pandemic. There is a level of anger that we are seeing out in the communities around us, and we'll talk more about that. But I would say the suicide rate it has escalated among adults and adolescents. Anxiety, depression. We are seeing, I think, the wealth gap in this country has really highlighted for people where there's inequity in healthcare, have suffered deeply. And the other piece of this, which we're not talking about anymore, is the mental health providers are really burned out. They're exhausted. They're getting sick. People are having accidents. We're seeing a lot more health issues. And
you say health issues among staff?
Correct.
Wow.
And so, one of the things that I think is really important to know, I have a relative who is a psychologist who worked in the front lines after the Oklahoma City bombing. And after 9/11, she called me and she said, Donna, be careful. She said, we're seeing a very high incidence of car accidents. And so one of the things that we need to be talking about that I'm not hearing enough of is what happens as a crisis begins to abate. And we have a mental health crisis right now, and it is really, really significant across the board. And for impoverished families, it's extraordinary.
And we can add certainly in the Bronx, food insecurity is part of it. And think of if you've worked all your life and you've done all the right things and you've raised your family, and now there's not enough money in the bank account to feed yourself or your kids. That has, it's one thing. Okay, we got to deal with that, but it creates all kinds of anger and dissatisfaction. So now I'm going to ask a follow-up question. What do we do? Is it a matter of funding for mental health services? Is it a matter of better media to explain things better? I mean, is it just get more people to say, hey, I agree, I need to speak to somebody? I mean, Dr. Friedman, what do you think?
It's multi-pronged. We first have to start with the people who are providing service. Many of us have not had a true vacation in 2 years. And we've worked through illness ourselves. We worked through deaths ourselves of family members, close family members. And and this is both on the healthcare side and on the mental health care side. And it's a dangerous thing when you do not take care of the helpers. So that's one piece. And there are many ways to do it. Some of it's with funding, some of it's with, I think we need a group of volunteers to support the workers who have really gotten us through this, to do things that they do. On
that note, every one of us, and I remember the 7 p.m. people leaning out their windows and cheering for health workers, and I would do it every day if it was a thing to do, because they deserve it. But for mental health workers, there probably was not the same understanding, and what you're articulating is this is an issue. Let's go around the room and get everybody's impressions on a similar thing. Dr. Karlin, let's talk to you a little bit about the children. You and I have had discussions about the need for counseling in schools. How has that worked out? Are we doing a somewhat decent job? And then what do we hear from the children and their parents in the schools about the needs and concerns that they have?
Well, the staffing issues that have existed, unfortunately, do continue to exist. I think that a lot of the issues that Dr. Friedman was bringing up around the needs for the adults and the mental health providers are also there in the schools, both for the folks who are providing the mental health supports, as well as for the teachers and the teaching assistants. They are they're the backbone and the core of the schools, and they are also understaffed. They've also been dealing and bathing in the stress of the pandemic. And then I think, as you alluded to briefly at the beginning, all of these transitions have had just major impacts on the disruptions into the development, the academics, the socialization skills for the kids coming back. I heard a superintendent yesterday in a meeting describe the transition back to live services for kids coming from remote was like diving into the deep end of the pool into ice water. And I thought that was...
I'm sorry for laughing. I don't want to laugh.
I thought it was right on. And then you compound that with the fact that it hasn't been one transition, it's been multiple transitions.
Every day.
And I think what compounds it is not only is that the issues that we're alluding to, some of those safety concerns and being in safe school environments. We've had some of our basic concerns around safety threatened throughout the pandemic. And then when you don't have safe schools and you have people, we've seen escalations in chronic absenteeism. We've had, more violence in those settings. So it's really trying to create a safe community that kids feel grounded in to support them in that transition back, which is really the necessary, although not completely sufficient thing, which is going to get back, kids back to school learning and successful.
One of the things that we know about children is that they do very well with stability, with being told and being cared for, and know that, well, even though things are difficult, there you live in a safe world. If you didn't like schooling at home and then wanted to go back to school, but your parents were concerned, maybe very legitimately, about the safety in the school, and then they said, you have to wear a mask, but my friends are not wearing a mask, or you're not wearing a mask, and now you're insecure because you're saying, wait a minute, am I not safe because, Johnny across the way is wearing a mask? And then the instructions change. I read a thing today that in Penn Station, nobody knew whether to follow the city rules, the state rules, or the federal rules when it came to masking on the trains. And that same confusion happens in schools with children and parents. I can't even imagine it. So what do you do? I mean, how do you talk to the kids? Do you feel like in some cases you're having, I'd like to think, positive effect? I mean, where is that at?
There are a lot of layers to kind of support this. I think trying to have a consistent understanding of what a classroom, what a school, what a district's approach is to managing, whether it be safety, pandemic rules, all those things, so that parents can also do their best to provide preparatory information. Going in with a sense of what to expect gives you a sense of control and efficacy. And if you're managing that walking into a situation, then you're going to do a lot better if you don't know what to expect. So trying to kind of be proactive to understand that, get that information as much as you can ahead of time, and going over those things. And yes, then having those on-site supports to deal with all the blips and confusions and the things that are invariably going to come up. And that's where having those embedded mental health supports in the schools can be so helpful, because the numbers that we've seen for the adults in terms of the rise in anxiety and depression and all those adjustment issues are certainly being seen with the kids as well.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to put this on my friend Lynne Maureen Hurdle's head, but crime is up. You might have noticed. And as I mentioned to you folks, and we were talking with our producers before the show, obviously we know guns are out there, and you don't need a stronger advocate than me to tell you that, we got to get the guns off the streets, and the iron pipeline has to be closed. But I see conflicts of random violence. I see stabbings, which is not a crime of opportunity, which is somebody with real anger. So in your travels, in the many lectures you do, and all the things you do to close conflicts, do you feel a greater sense of tension and anger that leads to these kinds of things in the relationships between people, everyday people doing everyday things?
Oh,
That's for you,
absolutely.
Lynne.
Yeah, absolutely. I've been writing about mental health for a long time, actually, as a part of conflict resolution. People don't even want to talk about the fact that if you are not taking care of your mental health, then engaging in conversation productively is really difficult, because you aren't seeing it from the best perspective, the healthiest perspective. And so we've got to talk about, with the pandemic, we sheltered in for months. And the basic human need is belonging, community, togetherness, right? And then the other piece is that people want control over their lives. And we all had none. Not only did we not have control, we know anybody who did have control over any of this, right? We kept getting all these different reports, and one day this, one day the other, and we're still honestly getting that same thing. As you mentioned, like who's running the show? What rules are we going by? So the need to be in community that we were deprived of, and then the conversations that we might have with one another, we were deprived of, and then the need to be in control of our own lives, even though, we're not really in control, but ultimately we can have some control over the things that we say we do, the people that we're around, and circumstances to to a limited extent. So that then builds up a whole host of emotions. You talk about anger, but underneath that is so much more. Just to be that vulnerable is really difficult for a lot of people. So the vulnerability is there on top of just feeling desperate and disappointed. And then the needs that are not being met and haven't been met are astronomical as well. And so you put those things together and people are acting on it.
And so for all of us, listen, we all know the problems. Listen, think about, the eviction. Then you're worried if the eviction moratorium is going to end. And then even if it does, in many cases, people owe all that back rent. So, here's a $20,000 bill that has not been forgiven. That's as much tension as, just about anything else. So, Lynne Maureen Hurdle, what is the advice for somebody who may be in a family and they're feeling a youngster has tremendous anger, or a parent wants to counsel somebody? Listen, I understand that we're all not happy right now. Grandma died. I mean, there could be any number, or your favorite uncle died. I mean, this happened all over the country. What do you say to people to help them lower the temperature so that, God forbid, it doesn't, extend into a horrible incident? That's for you, Lynne.
Yeah. So, first of all, I don't think that people are really aware of how much control we have over something like our breath, and how important it is to know how to breathe in ways that allow us to actually de-escalate ourselves. And people take that for granted. And I'm not talking about, what we used to say, like count to 10 and take a couple of breaths. I'm talking about really understanding how to breathe. So to take belly breaths, and I do 4 breaths, right? So I think about, if you breathe in through your nose and to the count of 4, you hold it to the count of 4 so that the air circulates, and then you release it to the count of 4. And if you're thinking about something that is really riling you up, on the out breath, to really try to release it on that, and do that at least 4 times right in the moment. Teach your children how to do it. I've taught my children young how to do that. It actually helps with the physiology, because if you know anything about yourself, and when you are getting heated, the body is very engaged in that. There's a very small window before it takes over. And so that is, I have to tell you, that is just tremendous advice. And I'm going to, you think I'm not under pressure either, like everybody else with all the other issues? I'm going to take that under advisement. Dr. Friedman, let's talk about virtual versus in-person counseling and support. One of the issues is, if you have a patient who's really got issues, you're dealing with them like we are right now in boxes, as opposed to having them in the office, where or in somebody's, counseling session or a group session, where you can look at them and measure physically how they are and how they come across. It's a little easier. Has it been a challenge? And of course, Dr. Karlin, you're going to get the same question, especially for kids. Has it been a challenge?
The interesting thing is that it has actually been less of a challenge for the clients. It's been more of a challenge for the therapists, who have been taking on so much of people's feelings and experiences that they are having a difficult time imagining themselves coming back and being in the office. And so it is a challenge. I mean, on the one hand, people find it more convenient. There has been an ability to connect, but there's also this disconnect. There's no social connection between the two people. I mean, I think our therapists have done amazing work, and people have been very, very responsive, but coming back has been a real challenge.
Has been a challenge.
For both the clients and the staff.
I can tell you that from our TV shows. In other words, I did a TV show for 25 years, and we brought people into the studio. I can't imagine getting people to travel to where our studios are and come into the studio. Dr. Karlin, what about delivering services to children and parents? Can you get them in the room together? Is it, Dr. Friedman says, from the therapist point of view, it's been somewhat effective. What are your thoughts about the fact that we've all had to be virtual?
There are certain things about telehealth that I think are incredible in terms of the flexibility it provides. I think if everybody's bought in, and I think that it gives, especially for adolescents who are engaging in services often for the first time, it gives them a lot of control and ability to use platforms that they feel comfortable with, and they can navigate elements of that experience. I think it has been certainly challenging sometimes with younger kids and engaging them,
Right.
especially for long periods of time.
Yeah, they think they're watching TV. I mean, my goodness.
We have there are whole skill sets of virtual treatment, and whether it be using also videos and books and games and other things. And I think that a lot of therapists have now expanded skills and ways to support our kids, parents, and families and do family treatment. I think there are opportunities also in family services. Is that it's really hard when you're really trying to do family therapy and get everybody in the room together. But now you can bring in the uncle, and the extended family member. Everybody can be represented, even if it is in a box.
Well, that's fascinating.
I think that there is that. I think we are learning. There isn't years of research on this to kind of say what the best model for the long term is. And I think we're, as we're experiencing this return and trying to find the right balance, we're trying to figure out what are the ways we can best match the level of service delivery to the needs of the family, making sure that family and child voice is being represented, but also having that clinical expertise to kind of figure out the best fit. But we know that giving families these options is really opened up a lot of doors to providing services that we haven't had before.
Lynne, did you want to respond to that? Because I had a different sort of question that I want to go around with. Has it ever been like this before? Have we ever been through something like this where everybody has been affected in some way, or is this Donna Friedman's going, no. It's never been. So this is really uncharted territory for professionals as well as, of course, for the general populace.
Yeah. The closest thing that we have come to is 9/11. The country was under attack, New York specifically. But in terms of the longevity and the impact and the global aspect of it, and the multitude of impacts, there was, physical health, mental health, job security, food security, housing security. It hit every aspect of our primary needs. And, one of the things that I think has happened to all of us is when you combine that loss and that grief, it affects our brains. I mean, we are going through a process on a global level where our neural circuits have been overloaded with fear and stress, and now anger, which is a primal emotion, and we need to be able to talk about it, and we need to be able to express it in healthy ways. But this is unprecedented.
Nothing ever like it. Lynne, let's just talk about interpersonal within a family.
Yes.
If you are a parent who is looking at your family and saying, you know what, my child is not behaving right, I fully understand why. How do you resolve these conflicts and maybe mommy and daddy not getting along because they've been cooped up together because they have many pressures on them, whether it be jobs or other issues? You see maybe daddy driving a little more aggressively. I see it all the time out in our streets. Yes. Somebody mentioned driving. Is it really is it as simple as what you were saying? Take a deep breath.
Well, that's the start. That's the start, really. But people really do have to allow each other. If you're worried about your kids, you've got to allow them to talk. And I think that what happens is because, again, this is unprecedented and we're all afraid, right? That parents are afraid to hear what is on their children's minds. But what I advise them to do is to allow their children to be able to say what's concerning them, to be able to say that, maybe they haven't seen their friends and so they're a lot angrier. Maybe they have experienced fighting in the home more so because everybody has been together for so long, to be able to hear that, to help them express that, and then to be able to assure them that, first of all, this is a household where we can talk about these things. And second of all, that we can talk to one another differently, right?
Mm-hmm.
That we can.
The final question will go around with everybody. Lynne, is there a hopeful word here? I don't want to depress people for worse. We're all dealing with so many things. Is the whole, so we'll go around. Lynne, start with you. Is there a hopeful word here? Because I know you're a hopeful person. I know you personally.
And
I know you are.
Experienced a lot during this pandemic. And so the hope that I would say is that as bad as it is that everybody's going through it, that's good too, because everybody's going through it. So there can be some real empathy for one another and understanding what each other is going through, because for the first time, not just here in the Bronx and even in the United States, the world has experienced this global crisis. And so we can really empathize with each other and know that it doesn't make us so strange or different.
Dr. Karlin, and for you, what's the hopeful word for parents and children, and how do you keep them, aside from counseling, and we'll put up all kinds of, let's see, Astor Services for Children and Families, 718-231-3400, or astorservices.org. We're all going to recommend that you reach out, because there are people that, to me, that's one of the hopeful things. There are people like this who are willing to help. But Dr. Karlin, how do you try to turn it around in people's minds, or young people's minds, to get them to feel, as I said earlier, a little more stable?
Well, I think one of the most hopeful things right now is that people are talking about the mental health needs of everyone.
Here we are.
Really openly, not just and you hear the president talking about it. We have everyone. I think it's in the conversation now, which I think brings some of those things out of the closet and the fear. And I think in addition to parents being afraid of what kids are going to say, I think kids a lot of times are afraid that the parents and the adults and the caregivers aren't going to be able to handle what they have to say when they're not doing okay.
Right. And that creates that instability, that creates the insecurity. So I'm going to say Mosaic Mental Health, reach out, 718-796-5300. And it is mosaicmh.org. And so Dr. Friedman will give you the final words here. What do you tell families who are saying, hey, this is a mess? You got about 30 seconds to do it.
Yes. Well, I tell them we care and we're all in this together. And we, as a society, have overcome many things, and we will get through this. They have to ask for help and talk about it. And it's perfectly okay to have it be up and down, and that, this is a process, and we are here for them, and we will support each other through it.
We're going to run out of time. I just want to thank each of you, Dr. Donna Friedman from Mosaic Mental Health, Dr. Todd Karlin from Astor Services for Children and Families, and the conflict closer. That's what we want to do, is close conflicts. Lynne Maureen Hurdle, thank you all for joining us. I just can't emphasize enough. Reach out. That's the bottom line. And so that's it. We will reach out next week with another program. Next week's going to be very exciting because we're going to be doing a political forum for the 36th State Senatorial District. And that'll start us into political season leading up to the primary. Good night.